What's going on, guys? My name is Matt, and today I'm going to be sharing with you what is probably the best price to performance new part gaming PC that you can build right now. For $800, you're getting a system that's perfect for playing today's most popular esports titles at 144 FPS, and even AAA titles like Cyberpunk at 1080p with 60 plus FPS. Not only this, but it's also great for streaming gameplay to sites like Twitch, which I'll also be testing in this video. This is going to be a full build guide. That means I'm not only going to be showing you each of the parts and why I pick them, but I'm also going to show you how to put this PC together step by step, how to configure it, and finally show you how it performs in a ton of different games. This is going to be a decently long video, so I'll try and add timestamps so you can jump around to the various parts. One other thing to note is this is one of the simplest PCs that I've ever done a guide on, so it's great for first time builders. So without that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the parts that make up this $800 gaming beast. The first part to talk about is the CPU. I usually pick the CPU first as it determines a number of other factors with the build, and other than the GPU, it has the biggest impact on gaming performance. What I went with is considered by many as the current best budget gaming CPU, which is of course the Intel Core i3-12100F. For under $110, the performance you're getting from this chip is insane. It's a 4-core, 8-thread CPU running on Intel's latest Alder Lake architecture. It has a base and boost clock of 3.3 and 4.3 GHz respectively. The i3-12100F is perfect for modern gaming and is even good enough for streaming and light video editing. The only minor downside is it doesn't have integrated graphics, but because we are using a dedicated graphics card in this build, it means that's honestly a non-factor. You may be wondering why I didn't go with AMD. Well, it's because AMD doesn't currently offer anything in this price range that competes, and until they do, this will be my go-to budget pick. If you do have a little extra in the budget, you could spend $50 more and go for an i5-12400F, but for this build, the i3 worked great and I have no regrets going with it. One other nice thing about the 12100F is the fact it comes with a decent stock cooler in the box. Gone are the days of the super ugly Intel stock coolers, and now we have these new stock coolers. Obviously looks are subjective, but I think these are much more aesthetically pleasing, and I think most people would agree with that sentiment. Beyond the improvements in looks, Intel also is now using copper slugs in their stock coolers for better performance. Don't get me wrong, this cooler isn't amazing and it's still somewhat audible, but getting it free in the box means we can save money here to use on other parts of the build. For full temps, make sure to stick around to the benchmark section of the video where you'll be able to see how this cooler handles the CPU load in a bunch of different games. Moving on to the motherboard, this is a part you do end up spending a bit more on when going for an Intel chip in general. With that being said, for $120, I was able to get a board that works amazingly in this build and gives you room for future expansion. What I went with is the Gigabyte B660M DS3H DDR4. This is a micro ATX board which offers a ton of features for the price. It has 4 DIMM slots, multiple M.2 slots, good PCIe expansion, and decent back panel I/O. One other nice thing is that it uses a neutral color scheme that should fit well in most builds and certainly looks good in this one. I'm not sure if I would throw in an i9 in here or anything, but upgrading to a locked i5 or i7 in the future is very much possible with this board. Sure, there are $90 options that do support all of our hardware, but this B660M DS3H goes beyond that and ensures that future upgrades in terms of stuff like storage and RAM will be much easier. Speaking of RAM, let's talk about the system memory for this build. Like the motherboard name implies, this board and build uses DDR4 RAM, which is much cheaper than the newer DDR5 that many boards use, and it still performs very well. What I went for in this build is a tried and trusted 16GB kit of G.Skill Ripjaws 5. This is a 2x8GB kit rated to run at 3600MHz CL18. This is nothing crazy, but for the $70 to $75 this kit goes for, it offers a good value and good performance for this budget build. Because this is a dual stick kit, it means it will be running in dual channel operation, which is important, and it means there will be 2 open DIMM slots on the motherboard, so upgrading to 32GB in the future is as easy as popping in 2 more 8GB sticks. 16GB is plenty for modern gaming, streaming, and even 1080p video editing. Next, let's talk about storage. After some thinking, I decided to go for a good value NVMe drive in the form of the WD Blue SM570. This is a 500GB NVMe drive that comes in at right around $50. It's nothing fancy but still offers very respectable performance, and because it's in the ultra compact M.2 form factor, it means installation takes a matter of seconds. 500GB is plenty for your OS, applications, and a modest sized games library, but you could always go for the 1TB version out of the gate for around $40 more. With that being said, upgrading storage is super simple, and because there's an extra M.2 slot, it means that upgrading could come in the form of another NVMe drive or even a large mechanical drive for tons of mass storage on the cheap. All in all, this 500GB SM570 works great in this build, and I can highly recommend it. Now for the part that many of you probably have been waiting for, the graphics card. Thankfully, over the past month or so, GPU prices have been dropping somewhat rapidly, meaning PC building is finally becoming affordable again. With that being said, I still had to put a sizable chunk of the budget towards the GPU. With a budget of around $300 or so, you really only have two good options: the Nvidia GeForce RTX 3050 or the card I went with, which is the AMD Radeon RX 6600. While the RTX 3050 does offer stuff like DLSS and Nvidia's NVENC encoder, the 6600 actually performs noticeably better in most games and can be had for a bit cheaper. The ASRock Challenger version I went with currently goes for around $330, but I've seen 6600s go for at or below the $300 price point. For your $300, you're getting a powerful 1080p and even 1440p card with 8GB of video memory. This ASRock version I have offers a dual fan design with a large heatsink, especially when compared to how short the PCB is. It requires a single 8-pin PCIe power connector and runs both relatively cool and quiet. Again, you can see specific temps in the benchmark section of the video if you're interested in that. Overall, the RX 6600 is probably the best quote-unquote budget new GPU out right now, and that's a sentiment that many PC builders also agree with. I have no regret going with this card, but if you would have went with something else, let me know what your pick would have been in the comments below. Powering this system, I didn't need anything crazy as the estimated power usage was only a little over 300 watts. With that being said, I still wanted a high quality, reliable unit with plenty of headroom for future expansion. After looking at my options and what was left of the budget, I decided to pull the trigger on a 600 watt, 80 plus gold rated power supply from EVGA. With a current going rate of $55, the EVGA 600 GD ticks all of the boxes. 600 watts again is way more than enough for this build, and the 80 plus gold efficiency means your PC will be running very efficient. The only real downside is the fact it is a non-modular unit, but luckily our PC case allows us to easily hide all those extra cables away. Speaking of the case, I went for one that is my new go-to budget PC case pick, which is the DIY PC ARGB Q8. This case can be had for between $50 and $55. For that price, you're getting a lot of value and can actually get the case in either black like this one or in white. This case has a toolless tempered glass side panel, power supply basement, decent airflow, is easy to build in, and even has RGB. The back fan and this front panel are both RGB and can easily be controlled by this button on the side of the case. There is only one fan in this build, which again isn't ideal, but temp-wise it worked out fine. Building in this case is surprisingly easy for it being a compact micro ATX case, and overall I'm amazed at the value you're getting for under $60. All in all, for $800, you're getting a set of parts that are high quality, reliable, and should work well together for years to come. So now that you've learned about each of the parts and why I picked them, I'm now going to show you how to put everything together step by step. This is a very simple PC to build, and I'll be guiding you through the whole process. To build this PC, the only tools you're going to need are a standard Phillips head screwdriver, a smaller Phillips head screwdriver for the M.2 screw, and something to tighten down standoffs like a pair of pliers, or preferably a nut driver. You're also going to want to have a big open area to work on and block out an afternoon to assemble and set up your PC. So with your parts in hand, workstation clear, and schedule open, it's now time to start assembling your system. The first thing to get out is your motherboard. Open up the box, pull out the board itself, then under this cardboard pull out the I/O shield. Now you can take the board out of the bag, Put the bag back in the box, close it up, and put the board on top of the box. Grab out your CPU and bring your attention to the center of the motherboard. Push down and out on this metal lever, it will pop up, and just make sure it's fully hinged back. Now lift open the other part of the socket like this to expose the pins. Now take your CPU and line it up in the socket. You can either line the cutouts in the CPU with the cutouts in the socket, or there is a little triangle on the CPU and on the motherboard that you can line up. Either way, once lined up, lower it down, applying no pressure. Once in, you can hinge back over this side of the socket, press it down lightly, the cover will pop away, then hinge the socket arm back down under the hook like this. Now it's time to install the cooler. Yours will come with thermal paste pre-installed, but because mine has been used before, I had to apply a pea-sized amount of thermal paste that I had on hand, but again, if your CPU is new, you won't need to do this. Then you can take your cooler with the cable facing the top of the board and lower it down, lining up the pegs in the cooler with the holes in the motherboard. Once they're lined up and the cooler is lowered down, press them into place in a cross pattern. They should all clip in and the cooler should be secure enough that you can handle the board by it like this. Once that's done, grab the CPU fan cable and locate the CPU fan header right here. Bring the cable to the header and line up the notch in the connector with the bump out on the header, and once lined up, simply press it into place like this. Finally, to clean the looks up, you can try and bunch up / tuck away the CPU cable like this. Once that's done, it means your CPU and cooler are successfully installed and we can move on to our RAM. We're going to install our sticks into slots 2 and 4, which are the gray ones. Start by opening up the clips on both ends of the 2 slots. Then you can grab your first stick of RAM and line the notch in the stick with the notch in the slot and lower it into place. Once you're sure it's lined up correctly, press down on both sides until the clip snaps shut and the stick is secure in place. Next, just repeat the process for the second stick of RAM and you'll have successfully installed your memory. Now bring your attention to the M.2 slot directly below the CPU cooler. Take your smaller screwdriver, loosen the screw and lift away the heatsink, also making sure to peel away this plastic. Bring your M.2 drive to the slot and line the notch in it with the notch in the slot. You can now insert it at an angle like this. Once in, I inserted the heatsink like this, hinged them both down, and then reinstalled the screw. With that done, we're now ready to put the motherboard aside and pull out our case. One tip is to pull the box away from the case like this instead of trying to pull the case out of the box. Once out, you can hinge out the glass with this little tab, lift straight up and take it away. Then for your back panel, you can unscrew the top and bottom thumb screws, pull back on the panel and lift it away. I like to keep these panels in the box and protected by the foam while I build, as it gets them out of the way and keeps them safe. You can now remove the manual and detach the screw bag that contains all the screws necessary for building your PC. Also, now you can unplug the 2 Molex cables hanging in the main chamber and take the fan one and route it through this hole here, then take the front one and route it through this hole here. Next, set the case onto its side like this. Before we install our motherboard, we need to do a few things. First is standoffs. We need to move this one from this hole here to this hole here. We also need to install one in these 2 holes here and here. You can get the 2 standoffs from the screw bag. They look like this. I used a nut driver to remove the standoff here, then hand started all 3 standoffs. Next, I used my nut driver to tighten them all the way down, but again, pliers would work fine here also. With that done, take your I/O shield and orient it like this, then lower it down to the I/O cutout and press in each corner one at a time until they snap in and the I/O shield is secure. When done, it should look like this. Now the final thing before inserting our motherboard is to remove the top 2 PCIe I/O covers by bending them back and forth until they snap off and can be lifted away. Now take your motherboard, handling it by the cooler, and lower it in at an angle like this, then hinge it down, lining up the I/O with the I/O shield and making sure you can see the standoffs beneath the motherboard holes. Now from your screw bag, grab out 8 motherboard screws that look like this and install one into each of the motherboard holes with a standoff beneath it. Order doesn't matter, just make sure they're all secure. Now you can lift the case back onto its feet and get out your power supply. Take it with the fan facing down and insert it into the back of the case like this, making sure the holes in the power supply line up with the holes in the case. Now take 4 screws that look like this and install one into each of the holes, securing the power supply into place. With that done, we can now start routing cables. Start by taking the 8-pin CPU cable that looks like this and push it through the hole in the top right here. Now take the big 24-pin connector that looks like this and push it through this hole here. Now take the 8-pin VGA cable that looks like this and route it through the hole right here. It should come out right here in the main chamber. Now take the HD audio cable and push it through this hole right here, and again, here's another angle of where it should be coming out in the main chamber. Now take both the USB 2 block connector and the front panel connectors that look like this and push them through the same hole that the 8-pin PCIe power connector went through right here. The last cable to route is the big USB 3 cable that looks like this. It goes through the same hole that the 24-pin did. Finally, we need to plug these two Molex pieces together and a Molex connector from our power supply to the white end of this chain. I actually plugged in the white part first because it was giving me trouble, then reconnected it all together. Molex connectors suck, but it is what you have to deal with on a budget case like this one. With that done, we can set the case onto its side and start plugging things in. At the top left of the case, grab the 8-pin CPU connector and make sure both pieces are pressed together. Then line up the notch on the header with the clip on the connector and press it into place, making sure the clip snaps secure over the bump out. Now take your attention to the right side of the board, grab the 24-pin, making sure the two pieces are pressed together, then line the bump out and the clip up and press it into place. Now directly below that, grab the USB 3 cable, line the bump out on the connector with the indent on the header and press it into place. Now we will plug in all the front panel I/O, starting with the bottom left of the board. Grab the HD audio cable and locate the HD audio header. Now with the HD audio text facing down, press the connector into place like this. Now to the right of this, take the USB block connector with the text facing up and press it into one of the two USB 2 headers right here. Once that's in, bring your attention to the tiny front panel connectors and the F panel header at the bottom right of the board. Start with the power LED ones, and with the positive to the left, insert them into the top left two pins here. Directly below those, take the HDD LED connector and press it in, again with the positive to the left. Now to the right of the power LED, plug in the power switch, orientation doesn't matter, and directly below that, plug in the reset switch, again orientation doesn't matter. With that done, we're now going to install the final component, the graphics card. Start by flipping over this cover right here. Now unlock the PCIe lock on the top slot and grab out your card. Line the cutout in the card with the notch in the slot, line it up, lower it down, and press it into place. You can now take two of the same style screws we used for the power supply and install them here to secure the card in place. My cover fell off, so I reinstalled it like this, then flipped it into place. Now you can take your PCIe power cable, making sure the two pieces are pressed together, line it up with the header on the card and press it into place. With that done, you can put the PC back onto its feet, and we can do the last thing before reinstalling the panels, which is cable manage the system. I started by pulling all the excess cabling to the back of the case. I push all the loose cables under the power supply basement, then neaten up the cable runs, and in this case didn't even tie anything down. I made sure everything was flat, made sure the main chamber looked good, then reinstalled the glass panel and reinstalled the back panel. We're now ready to turn the PC on for the first time, but there are still a number of things to do before we can start downloading and enjoying some games. The first thing you need to do is install Windows. I'm not going to show you how to do that in this video, but there are tons of great guides on YouTube and I'll link some below. Once Windows is done installing, you need to install drivers. The only drivers you really need to download and install manually are the graphics drivers. For the graphics drivers, just head to the link in the description, select graphics, 6000 series, 6600 series, RX 6600, then hit submit and download the latest drivers under Windows 10. Once downloaded, open it up, select yes. This will pop up, select install, let it do its thing, then this will pop up, just hit install and it'll go through and install the graphics drivers. Once done, you can select if you want AMD to collect information on you, then hit restart. You don't really need any of the motherboard drivers as Windows is pretty good at finding adequate ones for you, but if you want, you can install any or all of the drivers listed on the motherboard support tab under drivers and tools. I did personally install the chipset drivers, but again, this probably isn't necessary. If everything seems good, you can shut your PC off. Now turn it on, but as soon as you press the power button, start repeatedly hitting the delete key until you enter into the BIOS. To the left of this screen, you'll see a setting called XMP. Change it from disabled to profile 1. Then to save and exit, either hit F10 or select the save and exit button down here. Confirm the changes and the system will restart. At this point, you are now ready to start downloading and enjoying some games. Speaking of games, I think it's now time to show you the benchmarks and then discuss streaming performance. So as you can see, the system performs really well in both esports and AAA titles, but that's just gaming. What happens when you try and stream that gameplay to a site like Twitch? Well, I tested streaming both Valorant and Cyberpunk to Twitch. When looking at Valorant, the system did report lower FPS numbers while streaming, but the average was still above 240 FPS, and this performance was still more than good enough for competitive play. I also tested Cyberpunk as a way to see how the system would handle streaming a modern AAA title, and I was pleasantly surprised at the results. The numbers were lower, but the average was still above 60 FPS at 1080p high. During both of these tests, the experience overall was very good on both my end and the stream end. So for streaming, the system works great. You will take a performance hit, but you should be able to run and stream pretty much any game you want. All in all, for $800, the system is offering some of the best performance per dollar of a new part system out right now. I think I was pretty on point with the budget and part selection, but if you would have done something differently, let me know what changes you would have made in the comments below. So yeah guys, I think it's time to wrap this video up. These build guides are a lot of work, but if you keep watching them, then I will keep making them. If you enjoyed this video or learned something, then a like and subscribe would mean a lot to me. Oh, and as always, this is Matt from Tech by Matt, signing out.